of other ones at small and large companies. So how many people have heard software is eating the world? Yeah? Anybody know who said it?
Mark Andreessen.
Anybody know what it means? So in his interview with Wall Street Journal, when he said software is eating the world, what he was talking about is that he made a bet and won a lot of money by getting small teams together in Silicon Valley, giving them adequate access to funding, and letting them focus and iterate in tighter and tighter feedback loops to find product market fit. And so he's made billions off of it, and the companies that he's been a part of have disrupted giant existing industries. Not all of these ones are his companies, but just to kind of illustrate that whole innovator die type mentality that we're in right now. Anybody been to a Blockbuster recently? Probably not.
They exist.
Right, so Netflix is obviously one of the poster children of the DevOps movement. So they open source a lot of their cool software ideas. Uber, I heard about and talk about a lot as part of my day job, but I was able to use it for the first time a few weeks ago, and it really is as cool as they say. I think it's valued at $20 billion now. So you can say that that's a little bit of a bubble economy, but the reality is that they've not just disrupted taxi industries, but they've really disrupted the logistics industry by providing predictable market-based pricing to get anything from point A to point B. So I think moving forward, everything will be deliverable, even without drones. So the FAA can't stop the Ubers, I guess. And then Tesla is one of my favorites too. I'd love to have one. So if anybody wants to donate, I'll leave my email address up. They're supposed to come out with a cheaper one, but you know, to the DevOps end, the cool thing about Tesla is it's really a rolling laptop, right? So they've got 4G connection on every car, and they can push software updates at any time. So for example, I don't know if anybody heard about the fire problems they were having, but if you haven't, they ride so low to the ground that at highway speeds they were catching on fire, and that's bad, apparently. So if you think about the way that it would have worked with a Ford or a Chevy, or pick your brand, I don't care if it's a Rolls Royce, there would have been a recall. You probably would have gotten maybe an email, but also a snail mail letter, and legal would have jumped in, and you would have been waiting in line and going to the dealer and all that. They pushed a software update that increased the air pressure and the shocks at highway speeds. 400,000 cars updated over the wire. And that's deployment, that's scaling, that's disrupting to industries. And so, how does that work in a bigger company, right? So I've worked at a lot of big companies. I worked at a lot of small companies too. I basically job hop a lot, so I've worked at a lot of different places. But I'm fortunate enough now to work at Pivotal, and we have a visionary CEO, Paul Moritz. If you don't know him, he was number 3 at Microsoft behind Gates and Ballmer. I think he golfs with Gates on the weekends. And he's a big deal, and I was fortunate enough to sit in his office a couple weeks ago and talk about organizational change, and he just dropped this gem, and I thought it was really powerful for this conversation, right? So frustration is never a powerful enough motivator to affect organizational change. You need one of two things, either hope or fear. I think fear is a little negative. It's effective, but it's a little negative, so I tend toward the hope side of things. So about a year ago, after consuming everything I could about DevOps for I don't know how long on the Twitter sphere, I found that there was a lot of inconsistent information and a lot of disparate sources of information, so I put together what I call a DevOps declaration. And I didn't do it by myself. I had this idea, and I grabbed a team and iterated. Had some friends help. Actually, one of them was supposed to be here tonight and couldn't make it. But when you read through it and you know what you're doing from a DevOps perspective, or you're just a smart person in general, they're mostly truisms. So it's not made to spark a debate. It's made to provide a framework for us all to be on the same page. And when the DevOps conversation comes up in the office and a CIO comes and says, you know, I read that we need to have some DevOps. Can you get me some? it's important that we understand what we're talking about. So this provides kind of that lingua franca as we move forward down this road of DevOps transformation. So then I wrote that and I got back to work. And I thought, well, okay, so we have these 12 principles and I can print them out and stick them on the wall and let everybody look at them and scream from the mountaintops and cuss at windmills all I want, but how do I really make these happen in an organization? And so as I was looking at the principles and the order that they fall in, is actually pretty natural to create a DevOps transformation. Pure luck, I assure you. But maybe it's because the four of us that kind of collaborated on creating that declaration put them in the order of importance to us, and we were all pretty universal, right? So 4 people does not a movement make, but when we went through, it's like, hey, you can really naturally lay these down one after the other. It is almost a 12-step program for the enterprise. And maybe they all need them, I don't know. Everyone I've worked at needed them. So let's go through them and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So focus on people first. Technology, tools, and processes are helpful, but our success will always be a product of our team. And these are all on the web too, but I'm going to read it to you because we're all in a room. I've got a captive audience. So the first conversation around DevOps, in my experience, tends to be around all these new, hot, cool things. My favorite one is that one. Let's pause there for a second.
Where's the automated meeting attender?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? So anybody find a favorite tool up there?
GitHub, sure.
GitHub, yeah.
What's wrong with all of them?
Oh,
I'd say Cloud Foundry if I could get a discount.
yeah, that's great. My rep's here, you can talk to him about discounts. I know nothing about money.
Rapper hammer.
But so, typically the conversation starts around tools, and that's definitely the wrong place to start whenever you're looking to transform a culture around DevOps. So we focus on people first, and what's that mean? Well, the way that I've seen it work is to take a small team of professionals, people that really care. Either they're new to the company and they still think there's hope, or they've been around long enough and they're so smart that they're frustrated but they're not burnt out. They're willing to stick it and go. So, avoid those that are burnt out, but mostly just get some smart, like-minded folks together and help drive this, right? Get off on your own tangent. Don't try to go organization-wide. And then another person that's critical to this is you've got to find, and I quoted executive because it doesn't necessarily need to be the CIO, but you've got to have air cover from someone that has organizational juice to help that team of that small team of thought leaders lead, right? So if you're going to affect change, you got to kind of make this leadership sandwich. Practice absolute transparency. Decisions are made in the open, motivations are clear, and discussions are welcome. How many people have been asked to make a change with no justification?
All of us.
Yeah? Maybe something that was even unjustifiable. So I read a really cool article about Gordon Bethune, I think is the guy's name, the guy that took over Continental Airlines in the 90s, and it was just tanking, and the culture was terrible, and the efficiency was terrible. He came in and he realized that the reason it's terrible is because nobody trusted each other. Everybody had their own agendas. And so, again, a gem from a CEO. They're actually relatively smart people in sound bites. So he came in and he said, we're going to be transparent, and he publicly stated that unless it's dangerous or illegal for us to share it, we share it. And why is that important? I'll answer my own question with why it's important, because a leader wants his people to be bought in, and he knows, a smart leader knows that his people won't be bought in unless they understand the motives behind what they're being asked to do. And the smart people that you need to affect change are always going to come around with that same question. So from a leadership sandwich perspective, your smart people are asking why, and your smart leaders are giving them that answer. So if you don't, at your organization, have smart people asking why, smart leaders answering that question, you don't need a DevOps transformation. You need a new job. Collaborate across functions. Everyone contributes to the delivery of software. Our job is not done until every job is done. So this is the root of the word, right? DevOps, that's the first thing that everybody thinks of. We're talking about dev and ops collaborating, but it goes beyond that. What I've seen be successful is really around ownership. So collaborating across functions to me is organizing that small team around a product instead of a project. A couple of examples. So in my former job, I was fortunate enough to work with some very smart people from both a dev perspective and an ops perspective, but also, you know, the business owner was right there with us, the tech support people were right there with us. We had all the people that could make the decisions and affect change right within one co-located area. So co-location's cool, it's important, it might not be critical. Because on the converse of that, a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to dinner with a Fortune 100 healthcare provider, the devs and architects, and they thought collaboration meant a construction project. So they built a giant facility, multi-level, open concept, floor-to-ceiling glass, you know, everyone's sitting at the same long tables, ping pong tables, which I hear people love. But their throughput stayed the same as it did whenever they were in the cube farm. So collaboration isn't a construction project, it's organizing around product ownership and having everybody that can affect the outcome work together to drag the highest priority items across the finish line, and then do it again and do it again. Understand your users. So every team, or every member of our team talks to our users, everybody. Actively seeking feedback makes our software better. That's the heart of this, is building a feedback loop and tightening it and tightening it. So you need to talk to your users and get feedback. And what I mean by that is, you need to talk to your users and get feedback. Everybody doesn't need to be customer facing every day. We gotta be heads down, we gotta do work. But everyone should know a user. Everyone should be able to reference a specific customer that said, I had a conversation with whatever. But in the cloud age, we all understand our users, right? It's big data, we got this. We can analyze the whole market in seconds. And I'm a big data guy, I love it. I love the capabilities, but that's not where you start. As you're going through this 12-step program, you need small data. You need conversations, anecdotes, to start getting everyone around the same page of talking to each other, and, you know, that communication with your customers.
Define your users from an ops perspective. Right?
So, could it be internal customers, you mean, versus external?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I've been in several roles where it was internal users, but, you know, the prototypical angry IT guy that's sitting there and is like, oh, fuck, another ticket, I can't believe this idiot forgot his password again. You know, that type of behavior is obviously toxic, and it is frustrating to do that. We'll get to other ways to deal with that later, but yeah, they could be internal or external, but knowing them by name, being, especially internal customers, being able to put a face to it, potentially have a lunch or a beer at some point, that goes a long way. And ultimately, your users are the source of your family's bread, right?
Be empathetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, be a user, right? Question the status quo. The scientific method is applied across the entire organization and everything is subject to improvement. So this is obvious, right? You need to be able to experiment. You don't have to be Google and have a day off every day to just goof off and figure out new cool things, although you can't really argue with the success of it. But that's kind of hard to get through an enterprise. But I'll give you a good example. I was at a local company in here, bigger, that bought a small company out west, and immediately that small company, all their engineers fled. One guy left, and I was part of kind of a tactical team that was flown in to fix it. And they had made the decision that because of the load on this overall system and the fact that they have tiers of users from free to various levels of paid, they decided that they were going to further constrain the resources of the free users and do one of two things. Either, piss them off, they go away, who cares, we're not gonna lose any money, or maybe we're being too generous there and they don't have a strong enough reason to upgrade to a paid plan. So the last remaining engineer that had some street cred with that smaller company and was known to be the guy that understands it all, had been through this before. Whenever you change the way that the plans work, he says, all you do is crash the entire system globally. And then this self-healing system brings the whole system back up, and whenever it does and it goes to start up everyone's application, it looks at the plans and realizes that I can't start any more apps beyond a certain level. That's a real conversation. I said, I think it was, are you fucking kidding me? Was what I said. So that's the status quo, right? They're like, it's okay, we can crash everything because it'll come back online. And that's cool that you have that kind of resiliency, it's great. But that's not a good user experience, and certainly why are we taking down paid customer apps to impact only free? So we dug into the code and we figured out how that resurrection happened, and we're able to separate it out and not impact any of our paid users and not have to do the 3 emails a week for several weeks to prep our paid users that, hey, we're really sorry, but we don't have our shit together and we're gonna break your app, right? So that's a pretty obvious way to question the status quo, but I'm sure everyone here has been through that where, why do we do things this way? And in a DevOps culture, you're comfortable to be able to ask that, right? The transparency part comes in. You're not challenging a person that made the original decision. You're just saying that we found a better way, let's try it. Oops, oh, there's other pictures on that. Yeah, so his plan's on the left and our plan was on the right. Always forget that. Do work that matters. Belief in the software we deliver, the organization we support, and the users we serve is the ultimate motivation. So doing work that matters can mean one of two things. Work on the most important thing, and don't do busy work. So a couple of things around that. A product owner and I were having a conversation one time after a backlog scrubbing session, and we kind of got everything into the buckets and said, well, these 3 are clearly the next things that need to be worked on. So before we wrap up, which one's 1, which one's 2, which one's 3? Right, has anybody had the ABC conversation with a product owner?
Yeah, they're all number 1.
Yeah.
Rank them all.
Well, it's 1A, 1B, and 1C.
Well, they're all high priority.
Okay, I'm gonna put my hands on the keyboard, what am I gonna type, right? So, wow, well, X is really important, Dan, and well, boy, X and Y kind of go together. Y is really important too, now that I think, well, hell, and Z is just critical. Like, yep.
Right.
Where are we on this? There can only be one top priority. And do it, get it done, and then the next one, right? It's standard, but in larger organizations, look, shifting priorities is one thing, competing priorities is another. It's okay that they change, but still call out what's number 1. Oh, and then the other one, I was talking to Charlie about this before. I was out at Pivotal Labs in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and as far as doing work that matters, I joke that they're rigid about their agility. So they have set hours. They work 9 to 6 every day with an hour lunch break. San Francisco, so there's the catered breakfast, and there's the, kale chips and organic fruit drinks and whatever. It's pretty cool though. But as you walk around, the thing that is most striking about it is, it's paired programming. We've all probably seen that. If not, it's a little bit of a mind twist, but it's very efficient and effective. But as these people are pairing, this wouldn't be there. There'd be no laptop sitting there. There's no one, checking Facebook or checking email or going to meetings, any of that. 9 a.m., a cowbell rings, the entire floor stands up. I don't know, is it a couple hundred people?
More.
Yeah. In that location.
2 floors.
Well, yeah, so on that floor it was a couple hundred people. They all stand up. I didn't listen to what they were saying. I couldn't hear. I was too far away. But it was under 5 minutes, and then it was go to work. But at the end of their day, after they've truly worked for 8 hours.
Problem solving was
Yeah.
another one of them. A problem that your group couldn't figure out. They asked the entire floor, did you guys encounter this?
Okay.
One was events, collaboration, and then the last one was add value.
Yep. Yeah, so their stand-up's quick, they go through their 8-hour day, they work the whole 8 hours, and then they go home and they don't think about work. So, and, from a hiring practice, they talked about it's not a rock star thing because rock stars don't like to pair. And
One keyboard.
yeah. It was a pretty cool setup, but as far as really focusing in on what matters, you have that top priority, and then priority 1A is to work the whole time, right? Work on stuff that matters. Don't be going to nonsensical meetings where you're not necessary. So that's going to be a tough sell in any enterprise, and it does help to avoid that whenever you organize around a product and everybody's working together on that one thing, because then everything you're doing is relevant. Now we're big data. If I was to ask anybody in the room to change one thing about your tech stack that would make the biggest impact, could you tell me what that one thing is?
We would get in trouble for saying it.
Could you tell me why? Could you tell me why?
No, not openly.
So, again, to the feedback loop thing, the big data part is at play as you continue to mature through this journey, and you're you've been sober for 6 steps now.
Do we get chips?
Yeah. I have a necklace somewhere. Here, let's toast to that. But so, the data side of things is that feedback loop, gathering and analyzing, analytics as a first-class citizen in any initiative, because if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you're going, then you don't know when you've gotten there. And then the ability to answer questions with data instead of gut feel and whims is critical as you're trying to find market fit, drive revenue, reduce cost, all the good things about it. This is really a business play, right? And on the end of that, after the questions are answered, that those answers are understood and communicated. So dashboards are great. Dashboards keep executives out of your cubicle.
Quick question. Doesn't that get companies in trouble by trying to go accumulate all the data before they'll make a decision and kind of have paralysis versus gathering enough data and making a decision, making a limited knowledge decision?
Yeah, no, your point's well taken. I think
fail quickly.
Yeah.
I don't think this flies in the face of fail fast. I think these are parallel tracks. So you've already got a prioritized backlog. This is about, and probably something I skipped because I don't have my notes up in front of me, but so you've got customer data, you've got business intelligence data, but there's also machine metrics that you're pulling and incidents and all that. So storing and collecting that data for analysis and so that you can make long-term roadmap decisions is a little bit different from the iterative cycle, I think. No?
I think data can also be about looking back on the changes you have made. So I don't know if anybody here's done much A/B testing, but my intuition's been wrong a lot of times where we'll try a change and run and see how it affects the users, and a lot of times you'll find there'll be a lot of insights from that. You'll learn.
It's big of you to admit that.
Okay, you learn sometimes the prettier email doesn't perform better than the uglier one. There's something about it maybe you don't understand, but you can learn that way. I think a lot, just understanding the changes that you make and how they affect the user.
And not viewing every decision as final, the end all be all decision. And I think that happens. When that happens, then you get the paralysis because, oh my God, we'll never be able to change course. So we better, have every piece of data we can possibly get. So, maybe planning ahead to revisit that decision in the future helps.
You should have enough data that you can ignore some of it.
Yeah.
So brace yourselves for buzzwords.
Got your bingo cards out?
Actually, I don't think, oh, I do say it in a little black text, but help others help themselves. So self-service systems increase responsiveness to our users and free us to make a large impact with a small team. I mean, it really is table stakes. Anybody know who that is? If I tell you his name is Clarence Saunders, do you know who that is? So Clarence Saunders founded the Piggly Wiggly. If you've ever been down south,
Shit, I knew
you've seen Piggly Wigglies, right? So they're still around. I don't know if that's wildly successful or not. But in 1916, he was working at one of his stores and had an epiphany that disrupted the supermarket industry. So prior to his innovation in the space, a grocery store was just like a general store, where you would go in and there'd be a gentleman behind or a woman behind the counter, probably a gentleman back then. Behind the counter, you'd go up with a list of what you need, he'd turn around and pull it all off the shelves, set it on the table, and there's your transaction. And what Clarence noticed was, every year around harvest time, the farmers go to market, they come back with fat pockets, they want a steak and a beer, and they want a party because, man, we've been working hard all summer, we got the cash, let's party. And there's a line out the door of people standing there with lists with 2 items on it that says, I want a steak and I want a beer. Probably more than 1 beer. And so what he noticed was, not only was it crazy busy for him, and so he couldn't do all the other pieces of tending his shop, the people that were in the line out the door started to turn around and go find something else. Go find another way to party with their newfound winnings of this cash crop, bumper crop season. So he invented the self-service supermarket, where the shelves are open and you can go in. It doesn't seem too innovative now, but at the time, people are thinking, what are you doing here, right? So if you're in IT and you're pissed off or perplexed about shadow IT, Clarence Saunders invented shadow grocery shopping. And he's the guy that you have to blame. Look forward to growth. Software and systems are designed to deliver immediate value while accounting for future scalability. So everybody's heard of infrastructure as code, and probably a bunch of other stuff as code, because everything's software now, everything's code. And we've got a cloud, so we've got nearly infinite resources of compute and storage and memory and all that. But a lot of our legacy systems aren't architected to take advantage of that, and that's okay. I would never recommend that as you start walking down this 12-step process and you're trying to transform an organization, you start by taking the biggest, most complex legacy beast and unwind it, right? But there's a set of best practices out there. Steve Womack, who works with Dave, gave a talk on this. The 12-factor app. It's not mine. The guys from Heroku wrote this. I'd encourage anyone that's in software to go check out 12factor.net. A lot of it just makes perfect sense, but it's designed to take advantage of the modern third platform for application development so that you can scale horizontally at any tier, and that includes your infrastructure. Build confidence with testing. How many people here do test-driven development of their software? How many people go beyond unit testing? Beyond integration testing? So UAT, right?
How many people piss off their users?
All the time, yeah. Well, understand your users so that you can figure out how to piss them off. That was principle number 4, man. So, I mean, I think we all know this, but the thing is, a lot of times, the ops side of the house, or maybe it's compliance and audit and security, but people get blamed for slowing down change. Rightfully so. They're the guys that are up at 3 o'clock in the morning whenever changes go south. So you can fight that, or you can take your leadership sandwich, take the top piece of bread off that executive sponsor and try to turn that into a hammer and whack them with it. But that's only going to work once or twice, and that executive sponsor is going to be like, dude, you wrote crappy code. I'm not going to keep having your back on pushing this. So, I mean, I think the right and the professional way to really start accelerating your delivery to market is to move toward testing first, early, often, everything. Treat it all like software and test it. And if somebody tells you they can't test it, there's no way to test it, they're lying. you can find a way to mock it, you can find a way to test it, you can find a way to get what you want out of the test, which is confidence, so that everybody understands and you build a track record and a rapport and that bridge that lets you move faster as an organization. Oh yeah, automation. Now we're to DevOps. This is why everybody comes to DevOps, right? Automation. So automate the lifecycle. Barriers between development and production are overcome with predictable, repeatable automation, and changes are welcomed without fear. Sounds just like work, right? So, a few jobs ago now, I ran a team called the Enterprise Automation Systems team. At the time, it was relatively innovative. This was pre, open source goodness where everybody was able to do kind of infrastructure as code. We were automating server deployments and software packaging on top of that. Scale outs were pretty easy for all of our internal customers, but we weren't eating our own dog food. So everybody that we were serving was wildly successful, but then we couldn't scale to support the next new team or the next new initiative. So I challenged my guys to come up with a way to automate what we're doing. And whenever you turn that into a mirror and you're really looking at it, it's like, wow, how the hell are we enabling all these people and we're not enabling ourselves, right? So they said, well, it's really hard. There's a lot of different moving parts to what we do. Who's watching the watcher type thing? How are we going to automate all this? So I said, well, let's start by understanding the life cycle. That's the second piece of it. We're not just automate everything, automate the life cycle of delivery. So we kind of built internally what I call the definition of done. And this isn't inclusive, it's just a slide. Because the code part isn't on here. But frequently, when you talk about automation, you're kind of focused on like continuous integration, right? And get that test build piece done. And then, good shops have push button deployments or maybe even headless. That's pretty cool. But then, the line's kind of drawn there like, okay, cool, we automated everything, it's out in production. But if you look at a production life cycle, if it's this long, everything through deployment's about like that. The rest of it's running, right? It's running, it's out there. Now maybe you're doing this part a lot, I hope you are. But still, the bulk of the time, that application is not being coded, it's being run. So, once it's out there, how do we track our assets? What are we monitoring? Who do we notify? Where do we escalate when things break? What are we diagnosing, remediating, scaling? How are we collecting data once it's out there to feed back into our feedback loop and reporting that data so that everyone has a clear picture of what it is we're doing here? So, two kind of things there, automate and lifecycle, and they both play into it. And then this is what I consider the holy grail of DevOps, is continuous delivery, right? So software is ready for users at all times. Production releases are simple, they're low risk, they're frequent, there's a lot of agility play into that, and we're responsive to customer needs, but we're not reactive. We're always moving forward, we're sharks, not snakes. So we just keep on swimming through and biting off more and more and going as we need. A couple of cautions though on continuous delivery. Is anybody doing continuous delivery?
Not at work.
You are?
Yeah.
That's cool. I figured it'd be you.
Continuous deployment.
You're the one.
Continuous deployment or continuous delivery?
Delivery. And yeah, that's exactly the first thing I was going to say about it. So I've never been somewhere that was successful in getting to a continuous delivery level of maturity. So maybe someone else could give this slide, but
we don't even have it for all systems, so it's like some things we don't.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
The transformation is about starting small.
Startup, enterprise.
Yeah, that was slightly different.
No, but I mean, that's a good.
No, that's great. And that's why
where the
software is eating the
drives
world,
us
right?
in
That's why DevOps is eating the world, because
that's a good.
yeah. So, good point though. To have continuous delivery is not continuous deployment, and a lot of people think that. So, the two things that I see going wrong is one, incorrect dependencies, poorly defined dependencies. So you feel like everything's tested and we could push, but what about this other thing? It's almost done. Like being ready to deploy at any time is being ready to deploy at any time, not, oh, well, we need to wait. So don't leave money on the table by waiting to deploy because you have ill-defined dependencies. And then the other one is to the point of continuous deployment. just because you can deploy doesn't mean you should deploy. So continuous deployment, to me, adds no value. So that's great, we're pushing code all day. And it's great that we're test driven, and it's great that we're automated, and it's great that we're all working together, and that we own this thing as a product through its life cycle. We'll dive in if there's a problem, but why risk it? The reality is, change is still risky at some level. So we've done everything we could to build confidence, but just deploying for deployment's sake doesn't make sense.
Like 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve may not be the best time to deploy your app.
I'm usually sober.
I know for a fact that's not true.
And so that's what, yeah, that's my little silly picture on that. But right, so continuous delivery is not every change being deployed to production ASAP. You're just ready. It's continuous readiness. So there, that was pretty easy, right? We've gotten through 12 steps. We're at the finish line. But you're never really done. This is an iterative thing. So now that you've done this, assuming with a small team, and you've shown some success, and you've made your executive sponsor the next C-level or whatever, because he gets to be on the cover of CIO magazine as this DevOps guru, right? Then you're an evangelist. But you can keep getting better. So to keep it easier, instead of focusing on the 12 things and shit, now I gotta go back out to the internet and remember those 12 principles, because I've been living this, but apparently there's a recipe and I'll follow it. I'll leave you guys with this. That's really all of it boiled down. And if you can remember that, your life's gonna be better at work. Focus on people first, treat the rest like code, and win together as a team. Questions? And if you want a sticker that says that, in the spirit of keeping things starting small, I've got little tiny stickers there for you that say that. Evangelize.
Oh yeah.
Be part of the crew.
You needed a unicorn on that one.
Yeah. Damn it. Give me your number. I'm going to text you
It
before I
should
put one of
be a
these together.
sparkly unicorn. Aren't all unicorns sparkly?
Touche.
No, unfortunately.
Crab unicorns.
So what do you guys think?
I think it sounds great. I think, don't have the luxury of working in a IT area, but
That's a luxury.
So I have to
You know.
move to St. Louis to hear this phrase. Do the needful.
do the needful.
Oh, no.
That's not,
That's just St. Louis.
it's not a St. Louis phrase. I've only heard it here.
Really?
Yeah.
Go work in State Farm.
Well, you heard it here first.
Joyce and I.
I think a lot of this stuff applies.
At the end of the day, though, I mean, it comes down to this leadership, this sponsorship that you're talking about, because, priorities are set
Yep.
by others, and
But we're getting there. I mean, so leaders, so it was a groundswell, and it's internet famous and blogosphere and whatever, but now seriously, CIO Magazine's talking about it. They're tying real metrics to it. The DevOps Enterprise Conference out in San Diego later this month, I think it's in 2 weeks. Gene Kim's hosting it. They got a ton of Fortune 500 speakers out there that are tying real dollars and cents to the ability to innovate and move faster.
definitely.
So it's growing. And it's, frankly, it's because of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't afford not to pay attention anymore.
Right.
Ops is a strategic weapon if you use it. These guys aren't just innovating with software. They're writing code. Who gives a shit? Anybody can write code. But what can you do with your code?
But just as we're talking about with Square, each of those companies did not have the barriers that any enterprise company has in here.
Yep.
So their ability to innovate, they didn't start with any of the debt or legacy that
There's no
companies
such thing
do.
as debt. There's no such thing as
Sorry.
tech debt.
Sorry.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah. I don't think anyone in here believes that, but you're.
Right, well, and everyone on their team is highly valued because they have to be there because they're business critical, right? There's no cruft. We don't get into step 13 where it's like, okay, now get on the bus or get off, and you have to change people or change people.
I think that's what, you have to start small.
All that means, but right, start small.
You have to.
What did we say when we were out at labs about get out, take your team and get them out doing their own thing. Don't try to make this happen wholeheartedly, you know, pick a product, and go do it.
You can't boil the ocean, right?
Right.
Start small, like start with one team, not the entire company at once.
Right.
One team, one app.
Yeah. But I mean, startups have started, I mean, I'd say they probably already had that on lock. Who knows? That's an individual thing. They have no choice but to do that because it's already a small team. They have no choice but to do that because they have no other revenue streams. So you're right. They have an unfair advantage. It's not fair.
So Dan,
Yeah.
how have you seen, you know, like Monsanto, there's obviously a big dev organization, a big ops organization there, completely different. You know, have you seen places bring it together?
So we did it with a completely separate product and just said, okay, when we cherry picked, in all transparency, we're like, okay, I know this ops guy will be on board because he's wanting to make a name for himself. I mean, look, ultimately, I believe it to be wildly successful. So anybody who doesn't want to get on board with it is turning down a potential promotion, more money, whatever. You know, you can really make a name for yourself. So we went around and said, I want that guy and that girl and this person and just get them all together. But we started with the executive sponsorship. So it started with a couple of guys that have been just all around architects, and you know, myself and two other guys that are architect, coder, systems guys, whatever. And then it's like, all right, now we're gonna put a team together. You know, and that was what it was. We said, so if you picked one of your apps, or you know, it's a pilot type project, and say, this is suffering, and we need someone to fix it.
But as you said before, it's that you gotta have that air cover, you gotta have that executive sponsor that will allow you to do that and pick those people and form that team
Yep.
and get it moving. Because if you don't have that, you're just fighting water level down.
Well, you can use black and white.
Yeah, and if you thought you were frustrated before, you'll be much more frustrated after if you don't have that kind of air cover. Because then you're like, okay, before I was frustrated that I'm doing dumb shit all the time. Now I'm frustrated that I'm trying to do the right shit and nobody recognizes it and wants to help, wants me to do it, right?
Or is actually working against you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
So I saw us get, you know, all the way down the road until we weren't completely continuous delivery at the last gig. That was the one poster child. The rest of it is, you know, kind of come in and say, oh, wait a minute, you guys are trying to do automation stuff and haven't even looked at people, so let's stop. Let's move back.
I'm curious.
Firing people is really hard.
You said
So
you're
kinda
at
have to just say,
Monsanto.
you know what, you should probably go work over there.
I was curious, you said you're at Monsanto. Are you part of the platform as a service initiative at all? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we have the new architecture, we do have air cover, but we're trying to figure out, like, should we cross-train the dev guys and ops stuff, or teach the ops guys the code, or, you know, is it just a collaboration?
Pair them up.
Like,
Pair
Yeah.
a head person with an ops person.
Exactly.
How much do you foresee just that solution driving some of that change? Because now the dev is not responsible for the ops, and the ops is not, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm just curious, do you envision that it will drive some change just by the nature of the technology separating the two? Maybe.
Right. So originally in this, I usually say don't read whenever I talk about the people, because the first thing that a leader is going to do is say, well, we got to have some of this DevOps stuff, so let's reorg. That's not going to work. And the other thing is they say, well, let's go recruit a bunch of generalists. Well, that's not going to work either, because this is a business problem we're trying to solve. Specialism is not dead. We're trying to solve a business problem, right? And the people that know the business are going to be more equipped to help us solve these business problems. So, to your point, or to Charlie's point, I guess, pairing people together to a dev with an ops to solve an ops problem is absolutely within the bounds of this, and it's a critical path to success, I think. But I don't think having generalists and doing the DevOps, or you know, you do dev, you do ops. That barrier doesn't need to be there, but when everyone's working together, it's also, flip side of that, unacceptable for, you know, a dev to say, I mean, come on, you've been a dev for 10 years, and you say, well, I don't know, I can't log into a Linux box. Like, you know, at some point,
Yeah,
we
I
drag
was just
each other
curious if
along.
you see some of the new, you know, platform as a service, open source technologies just driving some of this just by the nature of through automation.
I read an interesting article this
I'm
week
just
about
curious, like-
leading with tools.
Yeah, I was curious how if that in
Didn't
itself
follow it all,
can
but it was
start.
interesting. It was like, you know, you start with a tool, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, hey, wait,
Cultural
these
change.
people aren't gonna, almost the tool changes the culture.
No, that's true.
Was the thing.
That's what I was
And,
curious.
you know, it doesn't fit in my talk track, so I call it bullshit.
It doesn't have a sticker for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick, I would love it.
No, you
probably
get a
expensive.
quick win with a product or a tool, and
Hashtag
it changes a mode of thinking.
You still need to buy
I think
it.
that's
Use the
kind
tool,
of what I
right?
was
You can't
curious
just
about.
drop a
Maybe
tool.
the
You
tool
can't-
drives
it's
a little
not
that
one
quick
use.
win.
Right.
Tools
Yeah.
change over time, people could stick around longer.
Well, we've tried
Yeah.
been successful.
But-
Of course.
Chef demos stuff and show it to our ops
Sure.
people to get them thinking about it. And the anger feedback was, there's no way we can do that.
That gets rid of
It
their
was
jobs.
crazy.
Was that?
Right, well, and that's exactly the person whose job should be gotten rid of, right? So
Right.
if you continually try throughout your career to work yourself out of a job, you won't be able to do it. If you continue to automate away what you're doing every day, you're more valuable and you're moving up the stack and providing more value every day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my mother
Yeah,
talking,
when
but she
people-
told me that from the
people-
beginning. It's like, just bust your ass and get yourself out of that job, and there'll be another one at the other end of it every single time.
When people stop you,
90% of people. 90%.
Wherever they go.
yeah, when your bosses and your peers ask you why you're sharing so much, that's when you're winning.
Yep. And again, this is a business problem. So the people, whether or not you're having to carry their weight on a tech side, if they're worried about working themselves out of a job, but strategically it's better for the business to be able to implement and move faster, they're not on the same page anyway. You know, but I don't think it has to be like that. I think empathy goes a long way in the beginning, and being patient, calm, rational, slow with people, but say, look, this is coming. I'm giving you a heads up. You know, and you can join us. You're not worthless, but I can tell you, sitting there and pushing that button all day is worthless. So you have value. What you do all day doesn't.
See, and I think fear is a healthy driver. I'm a firm believer in that, and I don't think it has to be negative at
But
all.
see, the thing is, you can do that.
I agree. That's
Like,
why
I don't get to
we'll have
do-
fear
I don't-
and
I don't get to do almost any of these steps at work. So what I do is I work on very large open source projects.
Right.
So I can go home and produce something.
Do that.
And feel good about myself.
No, but I think
and
the
cry
CIOs
so
that
much.
you're hearing, I think part of that is based out of fear, and they know what's coming,
Definitely.
and
But that's my sales role,
Netflix
right?
drove fear. I
Right.
mean,
That's my
That's what-
sales role.
Uber drove fear.
And you should be scared.
yeah, you should.
Uber took down the taxi
Yeah.
commission.
Which
St.
is
Louis
stupid.
won't allow
Taxis
it.
could just throw
I mean,
a freaking-
that's through fear, though. I mean,
Taxi drivers can sign up for Uber too. But they're accountable to drive the GPS route that Uber decided that they're gonna drive. And they're accountable to charge this, and the tip is already
Banks
included.
fear
It's just
Uber,
another
banks
tool,
fear
right?
Uber.
You know? So there's a fleet out there that could sign up, but they'd rather fight and go to legislation, whatever. They'll lose. The market will get what the market wants eventually.
Okay.
I wish it was here. It was great being, you know,
Yeah.
unable to drive and walk out of a bar like, oh, there's a ton of cars driving around that can pick me up. I'll take that one.
Yeah.
You know, that's cool. I hear.
I think what Andrew said, it's kind of like leading by doing. So yeah, if you can't do that work, lead and do what you're doing, or give talks, go to conferences, write posts on blogs, do all that stuff, and try to bring it to work, and show you didn't ask for this, but here's something that could work
Yeah.
that I figured out, and either you use it or not, but there you go.
Yeah,
But
that's
hey,
the
it's-
groundswell.
Yeah, that's what I like.
Yeah, well, and there are true curmudgeons out there, but a lot of times people who are saying, "Oh, we can't do that," are motivated because they are evaluated on pressing those buttons. Like they, their boss is looking at how many times they press the button. So if you can figure out how to get that diminished
metrics.
somehow, then and that goes to culture too. But
Well, there's
yeah,
the fear to
I'm
motivate,
changing.
and then the
Complex
fear
beast,
to
the
not.
whole-
If you're the
Yeah.
guy who pushes the button and you automate it, but that's the guy who makes the decision.
Right.
He's afraid he's going to
Chinese
lose his
proverb,
job.
Too much changes war, too little changes war. So you got to be in the middle all the time.
And the smart guy is pushing the button, scripts it anyway, so we could just sit back and watch YouTube all day.
But why should you push the button at all?
Right.
Just do some screen scrapes on the
Yeah.
issue tracker.
I was thinking, Grease Monkey, right? There is no button.
Too many bug tickets, do a redeploy.
All right, RJ, you buying?
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.